Well, hey there, Internet. You're looking taller than I remember. I think I set my tripod up too high. One sec. Turns out just standing up is much easier than changing my tripod's position. Also, I'm feeling a little bit informal since I'm just wearing this t-shirt, so... And then you can just cut. It's like magic. Anyway, welcome to this devlog. I did another game jam. I just had a sudden urge to make a game, so I went over to itch and I just scrolled down in the jam section and I found one of the first ones listed there was the Godot Wild Jam. And it was coming up like the next day, so I just entered and figured, hey, what the heck? And so I waited for the next day to roll around and they announced the theme. The theme for this game jam was 7. Yo, that's a number. So, immediately what comes to mind is like, oh, 7 seconds to like complete a task or per level, or, 7 minutes total to beat the whole game, or, some kind of timing system, or you can have like 7 enemies and it's like a boss rush or something along those lines. None of those felt quite right to me because a lot of those are like tuning mechanics, Those are things you want to be able to change to make sure the game feels, exactly correct. If you're making a game where each stage has a set amount of time, you want to be able to change that set amount of time to the perfect amount of time, You don't want to say you have 7 seconds per stage. It's like, it really seems like we could use 8 seconds. Well, that's just too bad because the game is built around 7. There are no 8s allowed. I mean, you could change it to have 8 seconds per level and then just lie and say it was 7, use an 8-second timer, but show 7 that decreases at the wrong timing scale. But all that seemed like the wrong way to do it. So there's one interesting thing about the Godot Wild Jam where they have these wild cards. They're like extra restrictions that you can add to your game to help you find the direction you want to go in. And because I'm a perfectionist, I couldn't let myself not use them. And there were 3. Failure is progress, idling is progress, and roll a d20, which is just some kind of RPG stats. What that means is if you fail your task, you have to make progress. If you don't do anything, you have to make progress. And you need some kind of stat system, something like RPG-like in element. So I had these things in my head, the number 7, as well as those 3 wild cards. And I had the idea of a dating sim with like 7 girls, but the goal is that you don't want any of them. It's kind of changing the idea of a dating sim where instead of there are 7 options, but you only want one, it's like there are 7 options. Can you avoid all 7? And it fits the failure is progress theme. So then I thought, oh, hey, what if it's like a princess, right? And there are these 7 princes that come from like different countries and stuff, and they all want to have this political marriage, but she doesn't like any of them. She doesn't know any of them. In fact, all those princes suck. She just wants to like go to school for engineering or something. But her dad's like, no, you will get married because you're a princess and it is your duty. And so she has to like be as awful as possible so that those princes are like, you know what? Never mind. I'm sure there's other princesses or something. And then to fit the theme even better, I thought, oh, pretty obvious, we can just theme each of the princes on one of the 7 deadly sins. So we have like the Prince of Wrath, the Prince of Gluttony, the Prince of Greed, you get it. And then to even further delve into that 7, it can be a week long where during the week you can talk to these princes and try to say the wrong stuff. Like in a dating sim, usually you try to pick the options that make them like you more. But during this week, every time you talk to the princes, you're just trying to say the thing that they want to hear the least, So the Prince of Wrath, he's like, I will go to war on everybody and it will be very fun to do the murders. But the princess is like, I really like peacetime and like not doing murder, so that would be really fun if we did that. And he'll be like, oh no, actually I don't want to marry you. You get the idea. That left me with the 2 other wild cards. Now, I did not need to implement these wild cards. And in fact, I should have looked at this idea and said, wow, that scope is huge. That's a lot of work to do. You should just do this. Don't try to add anything else to this project. But I thought, nah, I got a week. So for the other 2 wild cards, we need stats and we need idling being progress. So I had the idea to just add stats, like charm, grace, modesty, those kind of things, like the things that the princes would like, right? And you want to lower those stats in addition to saying the wrong things to make the princes not like you. And I thought, okay, what's a good way to lower those stats? We can have some kind of mini games that you play, and if you win, the stats go up, and if you lose, the stats go down. That also is failure is progress because you want your stats to go down, so you need to fail the mini games. And then I realized, oh, you can also rig all the game in the princess's favor. Like her father, the king, wanted her to be able to show off and show the princess how good she is. So there's like a dance mini game where she can show how like graceful she is. And her father hired like the best dance instructor in the country so that he can basically do all the dancing for her. And the princess will be like, wow, she's really good. So you have to actively go out of your way to fail. If you do nothing, you win. So idling is progress, you win. Failure is progress because you want to lose, and you have stats like the other wildcard says to have. Now, if you know anything about game jams, then you physically recoiled in pain when I mentioned the word mini games, because dude, you got a week to make a whole ass game. You're gonna try to put other little games inside of the whole game? So yeah, I obviously overscoped this game. I mean, you have to write all the conversations. You have to create art for all of the princes. You have to create the conversation system. You have to create all the mini games, art for all the mini games, and it's way too big for a single person. So how did it go? So I put a link to the game in the description. If you wanna go play it right now before you get any more information about what the game is, then go ahead, go have fun. It'll be a good time. No, the endings are kind of bugged, so they might not fire correctly. If you get to the final day and it just doesn't work, then just come back here because the endings are a little bit bugged, but don't worry about that, okay? So the very first thing I did was draw the line art for all of the princes that you'll see during the conversation, you know, because in a dating sim, when you talk to a character, they like pop up and then the words are on the bottom, you know, you've seen dating sims. So I wanted to make sure that I was capable of doing the line art for those characters. That was the thing I was the most worried about. You'll find out why that was stupid to be the thing I was most worried about here shortly. But so that was the thing I was most worried about, was being able to draw the line art. So that's the very first thing I did. That same night after the theme was announced, I went and drew the line art for literally all of the princes. I shall take a step to the side and allow them to scroll past now. I was pretty happy with how the line art turned out, and considering that was the thing I was the most worried about, I figured we were good to go. So then I started designing the architecture I wanted the entire game to use to make sure I had a plan for how I was going to program everything to link together. We have the main courtyard area, and you have the 4 minigames and the 7 princes all just standing in the courtyard, right? The princess is in the middle. Every day she has 7 actions where she can walk around the courtyard and talk to a prince or play a minigame. She can do what she wants for each of the 7 days, and then at the end of the week, the prince will tell her whether someone proposed or whether she gets to go off to her college because no one did. So the idea is we have a main courtyard node, and then in that node we have each of the 7 princes as well as the 4 minigames, and make them like an interaction, you know, just like an area where you can detect it. You know, the core of the game happens inside this courtyard node. Obviously, that courtyard will sit inside of the game manager, but that's where the core of it happens. And then also, a child of that courtyard would be the conversation manager. Now, this conversation manager needs to know how to load in proper conversations and how to display them on screen, you know, actually do the dating sim part of the game. So I decided to just use JSON to store all of this. Each prince has their own JSON file that lists all of their conversations. And that's pretty much all we needed. The princess node for handling the player information, the courtyard node where everything lives, the different prince nodes for each of the princes, and they understand how to pull their conversations from their JSON file based on which day it is and how far you are and how interested they are. And then a conversation manager that once you talk to a prince, it can send that conversation data into the manager. It emits a signal that says, here's my conversation. And then the conversation manager knows how to display that, knows how to take input. And then after the conversation's finished, it signals to the game manager and says, hey, go back to the courtyard, and we used up an action. And then it'll transition back to the courtyard. You'll have one last action unless you're out of actions, in which case it will transfer to the next day. And that addresses the entire core gameplay loop, except for the one gigantic elephant in the room that I'm ignoring, which is the mini games. So in the same way I had a prince with each interactable area that can load their conversation data, I then created minigame interactable areas where you could go to start the minigame. And then I had to make all the minigames. First, I made the Grace minigame, which was the first one I had in my mind, which was just the dancing game with the instructor. Essentially, you have the little arrows like in any dancing game, similar to DDR. You have the arrows, you have to press them on the keyboard correctly. But in this game, you specifically want to press one of the wrong keys. So that's the only difference. You still gain points if you press the correct one or if you don't press anything, but losing points is the goal, and you only lose points when you pick wrong. I then programmed a game for the decorum stat where you go to the royal court and talk with the king and queen. Now, I actually really like the design of this minigame. I think that this is probably the best of the 4 minigames. Essentially, what happens is the king says something and then the queen says something. And when they say something, it doesn't actually have any text. It has a symbol representing what they're talking about. Additionally, the speech bubble that they use is one of several options, and there are different colors for the speech bubbles. So the king and the queen both pick one of each of the 3 categories: color, bubble size, and symbol, and it combines those to make what they say. And then several options are given to the player. Now, the key here is all of the options except for one are correct in some way. As long as you match in one of the 3 categories, they're considered correct. You've kept proper decorum for the court. There's only one choice that doesn't keep the decorum of the court. It's one that doesn't match the color or the bubble shape or the symbol. So the only way to lose points is to pick the wrong choice. And this mechanic works great. It's super fun. It's really satisfying. I really think that this is the best of the 4 minigames. So then I made the minigame for the charm stat. Now in this one, I imagine you would go to like tea time or whatever, and then you'll have a bunch of bubbles that represent doing a charming thing versus doing a not charming thing, like holding your tea correctly versus spilling it, or putting on lipstick versus burping, or delicately eating cake versus chomping on some chicken, that sort of thing. And so I created these bubbles, like these just little circles that float up from the bottom of the screen. You have to click the bad ones to lose points so that your points go down. It's very straightforward. And your score just like increases through the round, since you're sitting there just being a pretty princess like counts as being charming, I guess. The first two minigames fit the theme much better because those were the first two ideas I had. Those were the ideas that came to mind when I thought, let's make some minigames. But I think this one still works. And then the final minigame I made was the one for modesty. And this one, my original idea was to have the princess's head, and then you would have these like compliment blocks fall down, like they go to her head, and essentially you're supposed to brush them off. So they land on you and you have to move to the side to knock them down. But then the key to the game is actually you're supposed to keep them on your head. Like if you keep them on your head too long, then they go to your head and like you lose your points or whatever. I tried to get this to work, but the physics was being really weird. And so I just abandoned it because I thought it was kind of weird anyway. So then I moved to the idea of just instead, we'll have compliments just raining down from the sky, and you're supposed to avoid them. You know, you're supposed to be very modest and not take all those compliments straight to heart. But instead, since you're trying to lose, you don't want to be modest. You just collect as many compliments as you can. You know, you let all of them go to your head. And then I also made it so that if you just idle, if you just sit there, then the compliments will fall around you. So that idling is still counts as progress, you know, to fit for the wild card. So making these 4 games took the next 2 days, and the art assets weren't even like totally complete for them. They still needed some kind of tutorial. They still needed some polishing. They were just like implemented, you know? This meant I had like the core tech of the whole game done, you know? It started, you could talk, the days could progress, you could play your mini games, it knew how to load in conversations. All that was left was like a lot of polish work and writing the conversations. Now, I thought, oh, this will probably take me about a solid day of work, you know? Maybe a little less if I'm lucky and things go well. I'm an idiot. I'm a big old stupid moron because that shit took forever. I'm actually lucky that I decided to stop in the middle of writing the first like set of conversation data because I thought, you know, I really want to do the official pixel art, get everything in there. And I went through and created the pixel art and all these idle animations for the prince and made the courtyard data. And I think all that stuff turned out really great. Like I'm very proud of this pixel art and these idle animations. But then the nightmare struck. I did not expect the conversation data to end up being like 50 pages long. And I didn't expect it to be so hard to write either. But you know, you have to write at least one conversation per day for each of the princes, including the I'm leaving dialogue and the like, oh, we got married dialogue. Plus you got to write all of the ending stuff. It's like, it's a lot. It's a lot of story and a lot of dialogue to write for these characters. And so, thus began my journey of not sleeping and instead writing. For the final days of the jam, I went 2 nights in a row without sleeping at all. I just stayed up working on this game the whole time because there was no other chance for it to get done. And even with that, it wasn't quite enough. I have to give a shout out to 2 of my best friends, Extrangi and Insandio. Extrangi wrote pretty much all of the dialogue for Fox. He stepped in on the Saturday before the game was due and wrote Fox for me because I didn't think I'd have time. And Insandio stepped in and she redid the line art for Orion because it wasn't looking very good. She did coloration for a lot of the characters that weren't fully colored yet. She wrote most of the dialogue for Lei Li. She came up with most of the story beats for Wrath and for Orion. Like she stepped in and did a whole lot of work. I did not plan properly for a project of this massive a scope, and they stepped in to help me actually get something deliverable for the jam. And I am really happy with how it turned out. I think the intro to the game could be a little bit better, and the endings are bugged, which is unfortunate, but you know, what can you do? Also, I had very little time to dedicate to the sound, and I basically got all the sound implemented into the game like 6 hours before the project was due after not sleeping for like 60 something hours straight. So it's really buggy. Some of it doesn't loop correctly. It doesn't have good transitions. It's basically just like barely in there. So that's my jam story of how Suitor Season came to be. I'm really happy with the project. I think it's great. And I'm planning on continuing to develop it. It doesn't feel complete to me, you know? I really liked the idea, but there were so many problems with trying to fit this massive game into like one small week-long jam. And I managed to get something in for the jam that I think is a really good product, but I think there's so much more, you know? It's almost what I envisioned in my mind when I had the idea, but there's just a little bit missing, just a few more things I need to do. So I'm going to continue developing it and look forward to more devlogs coming out. Subscribe if you want to see those upcoming devlogs about Suitor Season and the features I'm going to add and what it's going to look like in the end. And go play the game, the current Game Jam version if you haven't. Like I said, the endings are bugged, so you'll just have to play the full version once it releases if you want to see how it's supposed to actually end. All right, yeah, I don't really know how to end a video, so I'm just going to like, yeah, do something like, is this good? Is this what ending a video is? Is this how you're supposed? Is this right? Am I doing it? Subscribe, like the video, please, thank you.